Afternoon, everyone. My name is Bowen Ma, Minister of Emergency Management and Climate Readiness, here from the territory of the Musqueam, the Squamish, and the Tsleil-Waututh peoples. I am joined today by Connie Chapman, Executive Director of Water Management with the Ministry of Water, Land and Resource Stewardship, and Cliff Chapman, Director of Wildfire Operations for the BC Wildfire Service. We will be providing an update on the Chilcotin River landslide and the wildfire situation throughout British Columbia. We're continuing to monitor and respond to impacts of the landslide overflow that began yesterday morning. And we continue to urge people to stay away from the Chilcotin River and the Fraser River down to Hope. Slopes and banks may be very unstable. The land may change very quickly, and it remains dangerous. Now that the water is flowing past the natural dam, there is a risk of further landslides both upstream and downstream of the dam. Yesterday, 2 BC emergency alerts were issued to alert people in the area to the risk of flooding and to urge them to evacuate immediately. We are prepared to issue more alerts should they be needed as the situation evolves. Thank you so much to everyone who has kept clear of the area. As mentioned yesterday, the risk of a worst state, excuse me. As mentioned yesterday, the risk of a worst-case scenario has drastically decreased, but we are not in the clear yet. Water from the Chilcotin River that has breached the blockade has now reached the Fraser River and is expected to make its way down to Hope and arrive this afternoon. We continue to urge anyone living along the rivers to stay informed through emergencyinfobc.ca and gov.bc.ca/drought for all of the latest updates. Always follow directions from your local government or First Nation. I'll now turn it over to Connie Chapman for a more detailed presentation on the current situation.
Thank you, Minister Ma. So as Minister Ma indicated yesterday at around 9 a.m., we saw the breach of the natural dam. And we are continuing to monitor the site extensively as we watch the water flow through. Next slide, please. The two photos here really show and highlight the degree as to which this channel carved its way back through the landscape that had overtopped the natural river early last week. The channel that was formed was roughly 15 meters in size, and it was able to move a large amount of water in a really quick time. Though current data is currently showing that the river flow was more aligned with the 24-hour model, we will be undertaking further analysis to best understand how that transition really occurred over the last number of days. Currently, the reservoir that was formed behind the natural dam is decreasing at a rate of roughly 2.5 meters per hour. Next slide, please. The peak flows that occurred are currently estimated to be around 3,000 cubic meters per second, and this does align within that 24-hour model that had initially been run. Around 3 p.m. was when the peak flow really started to hit, and by 7 p.m. in the evening, we were visually seeing the decline of the flows. And so flows this morning have also substantially eased off, with flows roughly between 500 and 1,000 cubic meters per second. As I say that, the average flow for freshet within the system, specifically the Chilcotin, is only around 300 cubic meters per second. So we are still 3 times or so above that average freshet flow. At around 2 o'clock, just after 2 o'clock, we were able to capture evidence of the flows entering into the Fraser River. And the flows were led with a large amount of large woody debris, as seen in the photo on the right. Current flyovers have indicated that the flows that are currently flowing through the Chilcotin River and into the Fraser River have a reduced amount of large woody debris, and the amount of debris that is actually being witnessed within the flow is sediment, which is a positive. Next slide, please. So following the 24-hour model, what we have witnessed is that at At the Fraser River and Big Bar at around 6 p.m. last night, we started to see the flows rise. And roughly around 1 a.m. was when we hit the peak flow. The peak flow was recorded at just over 3,600 cubic meters per second. And there was an elevation change in the height of water level of 3.5 meters. The flows have also now reached the Fraser River and Lillooet. The flows started to increase at around midnight last night. And by 7:30 this morning, we had reached the peak, which it took about roughly 22.5 hours for the flow from the time of the breach to reach the Fraser River at Lillooet. And the peak flow that's been recorded is around 3,700 cubic meters per second. To put this in perspective, that is just shy of a 3-meter rise in water level and is roughly 1,500 cubic meters per second less than what we would see during a typical freshet season. Next slide, please. At the Fraser River in Lytton, the flows are anticipated to arrive roughly at 3:30 this afternoon, and we are watching that closely. Flows are estimated to be around 4,400 cubic meters per second, and that increase in elevation is anticipated to be just over 2 meters. So we are seeing that increase in elevation slowly decline as we move our way down the Fraser River. The next place that we are watching for the flows to hit will be at Bowinn Ma. This is going to take roughly 34 hours, and we are anticipating that it hit somewhere around 7 p.m. tonight. And similar to Lytton, the flows will be around that 4,400 marker. Really, once we get to Bowinn Ma, this is where we start to see these flows be half roughly of what the typical freshet flows. So typical freshet flows would be around 8,000 cubic meters per second. And here we're anticipating about 4,000. With that being said, we are still anticipating of seeing an increase in water level of roughly 1.8 meters. The final location I'm going to speak to is the flows at Hope. And so this is going to take about 29 hours. We are anticipating that it will hit tomorrow afternoon at around 2 p.m. But really what we will start to see is continuation of the rise. And so what we are looking to see is that slowly we are watching the water levels increase and that peak to really hit in. We are anticipating the peak flows to still stay around that 4,400 cubic meters per second and have an elevation change in the water levels of just shy of a meter. Through the remainder of today and into tomorrow, what we are really looking for is watching that pulse of water move through the system, looking for where debris is settling out and understanding where the debris may have been caught up and hung onto it just for safety purposes. From there, we will also be looking at ensuring that the numbers that have been modeled, we will be comparing them against the actuals once we're able to delineate the information and the data that is collected. So on that, I'll pass it back to Minister Ma. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Connie. So again, please stay off of the Chilcotin and Fraser rivers, away from the riverbanks. And this does include the operation of drones. Drones and other aerial devices interfere with the work of crews and experts both on the ground and in the air as they work to assess the situation. Our priority continues to be the safety of British Columbians. Many throughout the province, particularly in the interior and southeast regions, continue to be impacted by wildfires. There are approximately 1,000 people on evacuation order and over 2,500 people under evacuation alert due to wildfire. I know that this is a very difficult time for people under an evacuation or facing a potential evacuation. Please follow all directions from your local government or First Nation. Emergency support services are there to support people who need assistance with accommodation, with food, and incidental costs during an evacuation. The BC Wildfire Service continues to respond to wildfires across British Columbia with over 1,600 firefighting personnel. I'll turn it now over to Cliff Chapman for an overview on the wildfire situation.
Thank you, Minister Ma, and good afternoon. My name is Cliff Chapman. I'm the Director of Provincial Operations for BC Wildfire Service. Today, we just wanted to go through a quick presentation to talk a little bit about where we are relative to historical norms for the province of BC, touch on a little bit on what's happening currently, wildfires of note, as well as resourcing, and then end with just a little bit of a forecast for the next kind of 7 to 10 days in BC and what we can expect. So starting with the comparisons, we often get asked to compare fire seasons to previous years and then look at our averages. As you can see on the graph that's on the screen, relative to 2023, which many call the worst fire season BC has ever experienced, we're still quite a few fires below where we were last year, roughly 500 fires. And we're just slightly above the 10-year average for total number of fires in BC currently today. When we look at the area burned, and it's worth remembering that many of the hectares in 2024 were early in the season in the Prince George Fire Center, but we obviously have had a real uptick in activity in the interior and southeast, as Minister Ma referenced. But we're still quite a ways behind where we were last year, which is a good thing. But as you can see in the 10-year averages, we're quite a bit above, almost triple the 10-year average as we sit here today. In the province right now, there are 340 fires currently burning. Relative to last year, that's just slightly below where we were on August 6th last year. And then wildfires of note, you can see we're sitting at 8. Last year, we had 12. So just a few less than we saw last year. And, you know, there is still potential as we go through August, as you'll see when I talk to the next couple of weeks, that we may add wildfires of note as we continue to detect new fires. And they challenge our suppression efforts. Next slide, please. So here's a list of the wildfires of note. You know, these 8, and as I said, we may see more. They really kind of focused in the southeast and the Kamloops fire centers as we saw significant lightning activity and just very dry and susceptible conditions over the last month, and the lightning over the last 5 to 7 days. One positive is we will start to see hopefully some of these come off of wildfires of note. As we work on fires like Dunn Creek, we're actively looking to reduce and or remove alerts and orders. So hopefully we'll continue to see that trend on all the wildfires of note as we move forward. And I would encourage anyone to go to bcwildfire.ca to look at for detailed information on all of our wildfires of note, as well as any other new starts we may get in the province. Next slide, please. I think it kind of goes without saying, but I'll say it. You know, I really want to thank our partners across Canada and across the world. As you can see on the right hand of this graphic, you can see where we're getting support from really across the globe. That support has been critical in our effort to try to get these fires under control and try to move to a spot where we can recommend the removal of alerts and orders. So a big thank you to all those agencies, and we continue to work, obviously, as you can see with the graphic on the left. We have over 1,600 people in BC fighting fires. That includes contractors, that includes structural firefighters, that includes cooperative community firefighters from the community, as well as BC Wildfire Service staff. Also just worth noting, you know, we have over 200 aircraft flying in the province right now and over 120 pieces of heavy equipment. So a significant effort to respond to these fires. Next slide. And finally, just the outlook. So we have seen just under 10,000 lightning strikes in the last 7 days. Predominantly, that's been focused in Kamloops Fire Center and Southeast Fire Center. Southeast, roughly 4,500, and Kamloops just over 1,200. And the rest kind of scattered amongst the other fire centers over the last 7 days. As we went through July, a very hot and dry month for British Columbia, those lightning strikes had the ability, and the fuel was very susceptible to starting new fires. We continue to pick up kind of 12 to 24 fires a day, and we expect that to continue for the next 2 or 3 days, predominantly in the Southeast and Kamloops fire centers, but also potential really in all 6 of our fire centers across the province. The forecast for the next 7 days is we're going to see kind of a return to seasonal, so 25 to 30 degrees instead of 35 to 40, which is great for us from a response perspective, but still doesn't give that weather that we need to really knock down the hazard and knock down the susceptibility to new fire starts. So we're still in a period where it's going to be warm and dry. We're going to see a little bit of wind influence every day, as well as the potential for more lightning as we move through the next 36 to 48 hours. So Still lots of August to go, still lots of potential out there, and we're working very hard in the initial attack phase to try to catch these fires when they're small and avoid them becoming wildfires of note as we move deeper into the summer. Thank you very much. I'll turn it back to Minister Ma, and I'm here for questions if needed.
Thank you so much, Cliff. A list of all evacuation orders and alerts are available online at emergencyinfobc.ca. Please monitor emergencyinfobc.ca for the latest on evacuation alerts and orders. The province is continuing to do everything that we can do to ensure that people have the support and services that they need when they are evacuated. I do hope that people were able to find some time to enjoy the outdoors this long weekend, and I want to take a moment to acknowledge all of the technical experts, emergency personnel, firefighters, and others who have worked tirelessly over the long weekend to help keep people safe. Thank you for all that you do. We now have time for questions, and in addition to the speakers, we do have Samantha Wilbur, Senior Regional Manager with the Ministry of Emergency Management and Climate Readiness, Katie Ward, Deputy Director of Regional Services and Highways with the Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure, and James Mack, Assistant Deputy Minister with the Ministry of Water, Lands and Resource Stewardship.
Thank you for joining us today. We will take questions from the media now. For media in the room, please come up to the microphone provided and state your name and outlet. For media on the phone, please press *1 to join the queue. Media will be limited to one question and one follow-up. Please go ahead.
Hi there, my name is William Burr. I'm at the Radio Canada. I think this question is probably for Connie Chapman. Minister Ma mentioned that the risk of the worst case scenario seems to have decreased. I just wondered if we could just get a bit more of detail about like the big picture. Are things looking better than they might have? That's the impression I have, but could you just talk a little bit about that possibly?
Would you like to take that, Connie?
Yes, thank you, Minister Ma. So most definitely, really what we were forecasting was that worst case scenario. That was the worst case scenario that we had within the modeled scenarios and what we were really preparing for. As the event started to transpire, what we were seeing and the evidence as to how the slide was responding, we were actually anticipating that we were trending closer to a 6-hour event model, so that essentially the whole reservoir would have that rapid drain within a 6-hour window. What we've seen though is that as the events have transpired, the rate of flow over that natural dam has also shifted. And so though we saw that initial reaction from the landscape with that rapid pulse and that rapid push, we have actually, as we've collected the data, trended closer to between actually that 12 and 24-hour model. The key thing to keep in mind is that the models are our best estimates with the input, but there are so many other variables within the landscape of how the water will choose to move that it will kind of progress in different ways. And so we definitely were seeing early in the event that we were probably trending closer to the 6-hour sort of model. And now that we've been able to collect additional data and understand the pulse flow and how it's moved down the Fraser specifically, definitely looking like we're trending closer to that 24-hour model estimate. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Connie. And if I can add, I mean, managing emergencies is about hoping for the best, but preparing for the worst. And the technical scenarios aside, a worst case scenario would have been having people on the shores, on the water, getting in, being hit by debris and not being aware of the potential for these risks coming their way. And to that end, I do want to thank all British Columbians for heeding our calls to stay off of the river and stay away from the banks. We're not quite in the clear yet. We do ask people to continue to stay off of the Chilcotin and the Fraser River and its banks, but because people are heeding those warnings, we're doing okay so far. The worst case scenario would have been injuries and possibly death from people not heeding those warnings. And so do want to emphasize my gratitude to British Columbians for doing their part.
Do you have a follow-up?
Thank you very much. When Connie was talking about 24-hour versus 6 hours, that means that the water is like the period of the water gushing out is spread out, so it doesn't go as quickly. Am I correct?
Yeah, that's right. So Connie's and her team, the technical work and the scenarios that they were running was based on an overtopping scenario. Now, I will go back a few days. It feels like a long time, but it's been actually less than a week since this landslide occurred. In the early days, we were concerned about a number of scenarios, including the possibility that water would actually surge through the landslide material and break through, and break through that way. Over the next, after a number of days, we realized that the more likely scenario would be that the lake behind the landslide material would fill up and then overtop. And while it was overtopping, it would likely take debris with it and erode through the landslide blockage. And so a 1 hour scenario was based on the idea that that landslide blockage was eroded away within an hour, and that entire built up lake would flow out following that, whereas a 24-hour scenario is based on the idea that the landslide blockage would take about 24 hours before it was fully eroded and allow us to release the backed up water.
Thank you. And freshet flow means the springtime melt? Is that?
That's right.
Okay.
That's right.
Anyone? Yes, please go ahead.
Jack Morse, City News. I did want to hit on the spring melt, the snow melt, the freshet. I'm given to understand that you're expecting all impacts water-wise from this downstream from where it is right now to be less than the average freshet flow for a year. That being the case, why is it still important to avoid being on the river and on the bank?
So I'll start, but I'll allow Connie to follow up with a response. We have described this situation a number of times over the long weekend. While the flows, total flow is expected to be lower than the spring freshet, a typical spring freshet along the lower parts of the Fraser River, this water will behave very differently. And it was also very possible for the sheer amount of debris carried in this water to be quite dangerous to people and boaters on the water. And so it is largely about the behavior of this water. Connie, maybe you can elaborate more. You're often much more, you're better at describing this than me.
Thank you, Minister Ma. You touched on it well. Key things that we're really concerned about is the amount of debris that's at the front of this pulse of water. There are many unknowns with it and how and where that debris is going to essentially fall out of the system and land itself within the river, so where it will be deposited. The other key thing is that with this type of event, you have a pulse of water, so you see a rapid increase in water elevations versus within the spring freshet. We often have gradual increases of our water elevation reaching up to that peak level. So we'll see that snow melt start, we'll see a cooling period, we'll see a hot period, more snow melt. So we have more of a gradual increase often over a number of days versus over a 30-hour period. And so the real concern is just that rapid rise within the elevation of the water through those different communities. Thank you.
Okay. And this might be hard to estimate, or it might be a simple answer, but do we expect, what kind of impact do we expect to see? Is this water coming the whole way down into Metro Vancouver, or are you expecting most of the effects of this, I'm going to say flood, to essentially have dissipated, sorted themselves out long before it gets that far down the watershed? Because granted, it's quite a distance away.
So we do expect to see water levels rise along the entire river system all the way out to the mouth of the Fraser. However, it is the case that the further you are away from the landslide and the larger the Fraser River is, the less likely that surge is going to be as extreme for somebody standing next to the water. That being said, there is a significant amount of debris in the flow, and we do have to assess where that debris accumulates and whether there's a likelihood of public safety risk related to that debris. So for instance, if debris catches on a river bend precariously, it is possible that it can be dislodged, and you can have a lot of this woody debris flow downstream and catch boaters unaware. When it comes to the Fraser River and being aware of this event, particularly further away from the landslide, so lower along the Fraser, it's about recognizing that the water level can rise quickly and without warning. And so if you are a family setting up a picnic next to the water's edge, it wouldn't be safe given that that water could rise quickly and sweep not just belongings but people off their feet. And so that's the concern, recognizing that the total flow is likely to be less than a typical freshet. We're not anticipating widespread flooding, although we have been prepared for that and helping communities prepare for that possibility. Really, it's about life safety at this point. We need people to keep a safe distance from the water, particularly as you go further away from the landslide. Those risks do decrease.
Okay, we are going to the phone line now. Our first question is from Ulf Deppner from Black Press Media. Please go ahead.
Yes, hi, good afternoon. Thank you for taking my question. Question regarding the wildfire situation. We saw how this season stacks up to the season last year, as well as over time. Asking for prediction here. How much of this year's season is going to be a benchmark for the new normal heading into the next 3 years and decades?
Maybe I'll start and then I'll pass it over to you, Cliff, to provide some more information. But what I would say is we are seeing the impacts of climate change here in British Columbia, and we are seeing those impacts across a number of hazards. It's not just about wildfires, it's also about droughts, it's also about flooding, it is about landslides and debris flow. These kinds of hazards are occurring with greater frequency, with greater intensity, longer duration. We're seeing communities impacted by disasters one after another, oftentimes while they are still working to recover from previous disasters. And so it is important for us to recognize this as a province, which is why Premier David Eby created the Ministry of Emergency Management and Climate Readiness, in recognition of the fact that these kinds of emergencies are occurring more frequently than they have in the past. But Cliff, you can maybe speak specifically to the wildfire season.
Yeah, thank you, Minister Ma, and thanks for the question, Wolf. I think you nailed it in the way you framed the question. Is we have to be prepared that this is what our wildfire seasons are going to look like in British Columbia. And I think, we don't talk about it a lot during response season, but it's also why Fire Smart BC, why the prevention program that we've stood up within BC Wildfire Service is so critical to the work that we do in response. We need to make sure that we're really focusing on this hazard of wildfire for the province of BC 365 days a year, which includes the prevention program. It includes communities becoming fire smart, becoming fire smart and using fire smart principles as individual homeowners, because I think, it's August. We do expect it to be warm and dry most August in BC, but our fire season started 4 months ago. And we've been active since, and we expect it to go into September like we've seen in 5 of the last 7 years. So really, I think this is a benchmark, if you will, but I think this is what we need to expect in BC, and we need to put the effort into really managing this hazard 365 days a year.
Wolf, do you have a follow-up?
Yes, I do. Thank you. Given those answers, how sufficient are our current available resources to deal with these situations, wildfire slides, and so on now? And how much political will is there to do more, to put more resources towards these events in 5-10 years from now? Thank you.
So I'll start with the response, and then Cliff, I'll pass it over to you as well. First off, I can't speak about what is going to happen in 5-10 10 years, especially with a provincial election on the horizon. It is my hope that any government that is elected to lead British Columbia takes heed of the critical importance of preparing for the impacts of climate change. Regardless of political stripe, it cannot be denied that climate change is here and it is impacting communities in a substantial way. We are seeing communities work to recover from disasters and then be hit by another disasters, oftentimes within months of those disasters. We have seen situations here in British Columbia where part of the province will be underwater from flooding while other parts of the province are facing drought. And we will see wildfires throughout as well. And this speaks nothing of, this doesn't even include the hazard of landslides and extreme heat and extreme cold. And on top of that, of course, we have some non-climate related natural hazards such as earthquakes and tsunami. This is the reason why Premier David Eby sought fit to create a separate standalone ministry, the first one in Canada, the Ministry of Emergency Management and Climate Readiness. We provide staff 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year to monitor emergencies and support communities in responding to them. And we have recently updated our Emergency and Disaster Management Act to incorporate lessons learned from past emergencies and the UN Sendai framework on disaster risk reduction, which emphasizes that we can't just be good at responding to emergencies. We also have to do the work to prepare for those emergencies, to mitigate the impact of disasters before they happen, and to support communities in building back better through recovery efforts as well. There is a lot of work underway. Hundreds of millions of dollars have flowed to communities, directly to communities for that kind of mitigative work, the vast majority of which have flowed in just the last year and a half since my ministry was created. So we are putting the work in. Is there more to do? Absolutely. There is more work to do at every level of government, not just here in BC, not just here in Canada, but all over the world. Over to you, Cliff, on wildfires.
Yeah, thank you, Minister Ma. And I think just to add more specifically for wildfire, we have had great support to grow our organization over the past number of years to be more adequately prepared for fire seasons such as this one. Every agency across the globe requires support from other wildfire agencies when they are in times where they see significant activity on the land base. So we're not alone in that. Calfire, one of the largest wildfire agencies on Earth, still requires assistance from the federal government, and at times other countries' governments, and BC has supported California in the past, much like they have supported us. So the only thing I would add is that as we see this, as going back to your last question, as a benchmark for seasons to come, it is those mutual partnerships that we've been building within BC, the cooperative community firefighting program, where we work with local community firefighters, we work with municipal fire departments much more closely than we ever have before to really expand that surge when we need to respond. Not trying to do it alone, doing it with our partners, doing it with First Nation governments and their emergency management staff, doing it with local governments and their emergency management staff. So I think the underlying message is we can't do it alone, but there is a large appetite to work together in response to wildfires. And I think that's been very successful for us this year and will be moving forward.
Our next question is from Amanda Polehoscut from the TIE. Please go ahead.
Hi there. Thanks for the update. Mr. Ma, you mentioned the continued slope instability around the original slide in the Chilcotin River area. I'm wondering if there's potential for another blockage and if that's been looked at.
I'll start and then I'll pass it over to Connie with the latest technical details. But yes, when you have a significant amount of water flowing in the way that we see through the Chilcotin in an area that is very silty and sandy, a lot of loose sediment, you do risk, or there is a risk of additional landslides both below and above the blockage. And we have seen this in other parts of the province. For instance, in the Nicola River Valley, we also have a similarly very sediment, silty area. And when the atmospheric river event went through the Nicola River Valley, we lost Highway 8. So there absolutely is risk of additional land movement when you get this level of erosion happening. But I believe what Connie will say is that the risk is decreasing as time goes on. But maybe I'll let you speak for yourself. Go ahead, Connie.
Thank you, Minister Ma. So with this event and with 3,000 cubic meters per second really rushing through the Chilcotin Valley and through that river system, we have seen undercutting of the banks. It will take a little bit of an assessment to fully understand the extent and scope. We do need the water levels to continue to recede down to kind of the levels they were at prior to the event. So we got a little bit to go, but there is evidence of undercutting. And so we will be concerned specifically for those banks as to further sloughage and deposition into the river from it. There have been visuals while flying over the last 24 hours of small slumping events happening as the water has been flowing through. So there is most definitely that risk. Prior to, really we will be flying the system and we will have the geotechs out there to really understand areas of concern and make sure that the areas are safe before, a recommendation would be made to go and, recreate kind of within that space. I think the key thing to look at also is that when you look at this landscape on the bigger picture, it is evident that slides are part of its natural cycle. And so it's one thing that we will have to take into consideration and continue watching just with the different composition of the sediment that is there and the landscape geology. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Connie.
Amanda, do you have a follow-up?
Yeah, I think you did partially answer this question earlier when you thanked British Columbians for staying off the Fraser, but I just wanted to get a little bit more detail. I know up here in the Skeena watershed, I don't think I've ever seen so many people out on the river as I did yesterday. So just confirming that people are heeding the warning, staying off the river, and also wondering what the province is doing kind of at the front end of that water surge to ensure that people are staying out of the way.
Sure. So we are continuing to tell British Columbians to please stay off of the Chilcotin River and the Fraser River and its banks. And that is something that we have been messaging over the last several days throughout the long weekend. And we've been very grateful to our media partners and, the media as a whole for helping us get out that message. The word is getting out. During the last several days, we have had many overhead flights flown along the river systems. We had not received any significant concerns around people recreating in those high danger areas. We do continue to ask people to stay away.
Our next question is from Tyler Oslin from Fraser Valley Garand. Please go ahead.
Thanks. Yeah, in regards to the debris coming down the Fraser right now, do you know about the capacity and the ability of the debris trap that's near Agassiz to accommodate so much of the wood, and what, if anything's been done to prepare it?
Yeah, we have been working with our partners on this question and understand that they are able to deploy the booms and work that debris trap. I wonder, oh, there we go. Samantha Wilbur is able to provide us some more information.
Thank you, Minister. Yes, great question. We are definitely monitoring that debris trap, and we are monitoring the debris trap that's on the territory of the Squamish First Nation. The debris trap right now is operational. It's less than 50% at capacity right now, with approximately 50 to 70,000 cubic meters available. We are monitoring, of course, as the water is rising and keeping an eye on the debris that is coming down. We are confident right now that if the water does come up over 1 more meter, the debris trap will continue to do its job and trap that debris as it comes in. And we also have excavators on standby to help remove some of that debris when it's safe to do so. Thank you.
Tyler, do you have a follow-up?
Yeah, was anything done beforehand to remove logs to create excess capacity, or are you just confident that those machines on standby should be able to clear up and remove logs if capacity becomes an issue?
Sorry, go ahead, Samantha.
Thank you. At this time, we're monitoring it as it evolves, and we do have people in place to make sure that they can remove the debris as it comes through. They're also keeping an eye on the safety of being able to do so. So obviously, if there's a bigger boon of the debris that comes down, they're going to have to adjust and take a look at those water levels as it evolves. So at this time, they are confident. However, as I said, they do continue to monitor just as new information comes out to adjust as needed to the flow.
Our next question is from Georgie Smith from CBC News. Please go ahead.
I just wanted to get some clarity about the difference in terms of the flood danger to Hope tomorrow. I understand there's a difference between the front of the flood hitting and the peak of the flood hitting. Can you explain the difference between the two and when Hope sort of is at most risk of possibly seeing some of that flooding in the next 24 hours?
Yeah, go ahead, Connie.
Thank you, Minister Ma. So I do just want to indicate that I stumbled over the slides while presenting, and I did have a little bit of an error as fatigue is a little real right now. And so we are going to see the peak of the flow hit Hope at around midnight tonight. What we are seeing right now is that increased rise to that peak. So over the next 12 hours up to midnight, we're going to see the elevation slowly increase. Hopefully we will peak at midnight, and then we'll see that decline with us kind of returning potentially back to kind of more that average that we're seeing right now by the end of the day, recognizing that we are going to continue to see just roughly an additional 500 cubic meters per second to 1,000 cubic meters per second come down the Fraser or come down the Chilcotin, and once it hits the Fraser, those numbers really just they kind of just get lost in the grand pulse of the Fraser River. So my apologies on that.
Thank you so much, Connie.
Georgie, do you have a follow-up?
I do, yes. We heard from some First Nations this morning about their concern with the state of the river and what it will mean for salmon that have or haven't managed to get past the landslide at this point. I understand it's too dangerous to sort of get in the river at the moment, but when it is safe, what is the province's sort of first steps when it comes to looking at the state of the river and what happens next?
Yeah, I really want to acknowledge how incredibly important salmon is to our province, to communities in our province, to our ecosystem. It really is truly a keystone species, and any kind of impact to waterways that has the potential to harm salmon is of utmost concern to us. Of course, over the last several days, our priority has been on keeping people safe, but we have many other important key factors that we need to work together on this. I'd like to bring in James Mack, ADM with Water, Land and Resource Stewardship, to offer anything further that he can on the issue of salmon.
Thanks, Minister. So that's right. We need to wait until it's safe for people to get in there and work with salmon. What we do is we look at the historical migration, and then we also, with nations and with Fisheries and Oceans Canada, we can do monitoring about where the different species are at. Really, the majority of the adult Chinook should be through, and so what we're really focused on is the next return of sockeye, which we normally see the third week of August. We have worked with the Upper Fraser Fisheries Conservation Alliance. They've done some early flyovers to look at potential impacts. And so we're going to coordinate with them and nations, and then bring in Fisheries and Oceans Canada and the provincial experts to do the monitoring work. We'll assess and do the habitat restoration and the fish passage works that we need to do once we get a better sense of the impacts of the river flows.
Thank you, James.
Next question is from Dirk Messner from the Canadian, please. Please go ahead.
Hi, Minister. I'm wondering now that the dam's broke, the water's been going down the Chilcotin and into the Fraser, how you're feeling with the situation as it's transpiring today as the way it could have happened.
Yeah, I mean, managing emergencies is about hoping for the best, but preparing for the worst. The risks were real, and we were very concerned that the worst case scenario could have come to fruition. And under that worst case scenario, we would have seen significantly greater impacts than what we do now. Now, we aren't quite clear of the woods yet. We have still a few hours left for the water to drain from behind the dam, and then we need to take the time to assess how the landscape fared following that event. But I am extremely grateful that the worst case scenario did not come to be.
Dirk, do you have a follow-up?
Also, this morning, Joe Alphonse, the national chair of the Chilcotin, one thing he said, quite a few things, but one of the things he said was that some of the emergency briefings the government held actually made people fearful. And he kind of wasn't happy with them. I'm just wondering how you feel about the emergency briefings that you held.
You know, I think what we did over the last several weeks is what British Columbians would have expected us to do. We mobilized the resources that we needed in order to gain a thorough understanding of the landslide situation and modeled out scenarios and prepared for scenarios that range from the worst case scenario to a hopeful or more best case scenario. And then we prepared for the worst case scenario. Even though the worst case scenario did not come to fruition, that is what the amount of water that flowed from behind the dam resulting from this landslide was extremely significant, particularly along the Chilcotin River Valley. If we had people in those areas recreating, if we had people standing on the slopes watching the water go by, they would have been at a significant risk of being overtaken and swept along the river. It was incredibly important for us to make sure that people are safe. That has been our priority. It continues to be our priority. We are grateful to British Columbians for heeding our warnings, and we're hopeful that it is some time yet before another potential disaster like this occurs again.
Our next question is from Ben Melchior from CTV News. Please go ahead. Ben, are you there? Okay, that's all the questions we have today. Thank you everyone for joining.